My stepmother put all my things in trash bags and kicked me out at 17, saying, "We can't coddle you forever." When I asked if I could stay until graduation, she smirked and said, "If you can't handle this, how will you handle the real world?" I just stood there. That was 12 years ago. This morning, she was standing outside my house in tears. My stepmother never treated me as family and kicked me out at 17. So I bought her house and evicted her. When I was 12, my dad remarried a woman named Linda. From the very beginning, she made it clear I wasn't her priority, or even her problem. She didn't scream or curse right away. She was more calculated. It was like she wanted to chip away at me until I didn't feel at home in my own house. At first, it was small things. She'd serve dessert to my dad and her 2 kids, then say, "Sorry, there's not enough for everyone." She'd throw away little things that mattered to me. My favorite hoodie from my late mom, a rock collection I'd had since I was 6, drawings I kept in a sketchbook, and when I confronted her, she'd shrug and say, "Well, I thought they were just junk." When my friends called, she'd take messages but forget to pass them along. She would plan family days to the zoo, the lake, or amusement parks without even telling me, then act surprised when I was upset. "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to come." She even made my room feel like it didn't belong to me. She called it the spare room, rearranged my stuff without asking, replaced my posters with generic paintings she liked, and once moved my dresser into the hallway to make space for her seasonal decor. By the time I was 15, she had built an environment where I was always walking on eggshells. The final breaking point before the big blow-up was when I got accepted into a summer art program I'd worked all year to afford. I left the acceptance letter on the counter for my dad to see. When he got home, it was gone. I found it crumpled in the trash. Linda didn't even deny it. She just said, "That program would have been a waste of money. You should be focusing on something useful." 2 months before my 18th birthday, I came home from school and found my life in garbage bags by the door. Linda stood there with her arms crossed. My dad was there too, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. She said, "Your father and I have decided it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. We can't coddle you forever." I had no job lined up, no apartment, no plan, but she didn't care. When I asked if I could at least stay until graduation, she said, "If you can't handle this, how will you handle the real world?" So I left. I stayed with a friend, couch surfed for months, and worked whatever jobs I could find until I graduated. After that, I threw myself into survival mode. I went to community college, worked in retail, then landed a job in IT. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Over the years, I built a life for myself with zero help from my dad or Linda. I didn't speak to them much, but I heard things about Linda's endless shopping sprees, her constant bragging about her house, the Instagram posts of family unity that never included me. I never forgot what she did. Fast forward about a decade. I got a Facebook message from an old neighbor. "Hey, just so you know, your stepmom's having some money problems. Might lose the house." I looked it up. Sure enough, public records showed the house was in foreclosure. My dad and Linda had divorced a couple of years earlier, and she had full ownership of the property, along with a pile of unpaid mortgage bills. I didn't just want to watch her lose the house. I wanted her to lose it to me. I contacted the bank. They were eager to get the property off their hands. Thanks to years of saving, my good credit, and a healthy dose of spite, I was able to close the deal in under 2 months. The moment I signed those papers, it hit me. I now owned the same house she had thrown me out of with nothing but trash bags. I didn't move in right away. I waited. When the official eviction notice was served, I knew she would be livid. She still didn't know I was the buyer. The day she was supposed to be out, I showed up with the sheriff's deputy. She opened the door in her robe, looking like she hadn't slept, and froze when she saw me. "You," she spat. "Yep," I said, holding out the paperwork. "New owner. You've got until 5 p.m. Her jaw dropped. "You can't do this. This is my house. I've lived here for years." "No," I said, matching her tone from that day 12 years ago. "It's mine now, and you need to leave." She tried everything. She cried, called me heartless, and accused me of being petty for holding a grudge. She even threatened to tell the whole family what I'd done, as if I'd be ashamed. At one point, she sneered, "You've been waiting over a decade for this? That's pathetic." I smiled. "No, Linda, this is called returning the favor." She slammed the door, but the deputy reminded her she was legally required to vacate. By 4:30 p.m., she was shoving her belongings into her car, muttering insults under her breath. I just stood on the porch, watching her drive away from the house she once lorded over me. It felt like every wound she had caused had finally closed. But a few weeks later, I found my father standing in front of my house crying. His shoulders shook as the first drops of rain started falling, and I hadn't seen him this broken since Mom's funeral 15 years ago. My hand shook on the doorknob while I watched him standing there in wrinkled clothes that hung loose on his frame. He looked up, and I saw his eyes were red and puffy, and when he tried to speak, nothing came out except more sobs. I opened the door wider, and he stumbled forward, nearly falling, and I caught his arm to steady him. The rain picked up and soaked through his thin jacket in seconds. He pulled out a crumpled paper from his pocket with shaking hands, and I saw it was an eviction notice dated a month ago. He managed to tell me between sobs that Linda had kicked him out of their rental apartment 3 weeks ago, and he'd been sleeping in his car behind the Walmart on Morse Road. I noticed his clothes smelled musty, and his cheeks looked hollow like he'd lost at least 20 pounds. I led him inside to the kitchen, the same kitchen where Linda used to serve dessert to everyone but me, and started making coffee while he collapsed into a chair at the old oak table. His hands wrapped around the warm mug, and he stared down at the coffee without drinking it, unable to meet my eyes. The rain pounded against the windows while we sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he told me Linda had been posting all over Facebook that I'd stolen the house through fraud and illegal means, turning our whole extended family against me. He showed me his phone where Aunt Karen and Uncle Pete had sent him angry messages, demanding he control his daughter and fix what I'd done. I grabbed my own phone and found my inbox flooded with dozens of messages from cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all calling me a thief and worse. Before I could process everything, I heard a truck pull into the driveway and saw Linda through the window with Michael and Jessica climbing out of a U-Haul. She marched up to my door and pounded on it, demanding I let her retrieve her personal belongings from inside the house. Michael stood behind her holding his phone up, recording everything, while Jessica hung back near the truck looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. Linda kept screaming that she had legal rights to the the furniture and decorations she'd bought over the years. I stepped back inside and called Attorney Hartley, while Linda continued pounding and yelling threats through the door. He arrived within 20 minutes in his gray sedan and walked past Linda without acknowledging her screams. He explained calmly but firmly that she had zero legal claim to anything in the house since it was sold through foreclosure proceedings and all contents were included in the sale. Linda's face turned purple and she screamed that I was a vindictive witch, while Michael kept his phone pointed at us, recording every second. Attorney Hartley handed her a cease and desist letter and told her she needed to leave the property immediately or he would call the police. She grabbed the letter and tore it up, throwing the pieces at my feet before storming back to the truck with Michael following. Jessica glanced back at me with something like an apology in her eyes before climbing into the truck. After they drove away, I went upstairs to my old bedroom that I'd turned into a home office and sat on the floor against the wall. I ran my fingers along the paint where my posters used to hang before Linda ripped them down and threw them away. The house felt heavy with all the bad memories pressing down from every corner. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and when I opened it, I saw it was Jessica asking if we could meet at the Starbucks downtown tomorrow morning. The next day, she showed up 15 minutes early, constantly looking over her shoulder and checking the parking lot through the window. She told me she'd always felt sick about how I was treated, but was too scared to speak up back then. She warned me that Linda and Michael were planning something bigger, though she didn't know exactly what, and that Michael had been editing that video from earlier to make me look crazy and violent. Claire came over that night with our usual order from Lucky Dragon, the same Chinese place we'd been going to since high school whenever one of us needed comfort. We sat on the living room floor eating lo mein straight from the containers, while she told me she was proud of me for standing up to Linda, but worried about how this was all escalating. I admitted that even though I'd gotten the house, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected, just this hollow feeling in my chest. 3 days later, my work email exploded with hundreds of messages, and I discovered Michael had posted his edited video to our local Columbus Facebook groups with a sob story about how I'd stolen his mother's home. The video showed me looking angry and Linda crying, but cut out all of Attorney Hartley's explanations and her threats against me. There's something oddly specific about Linda throwing away a rock collection and calling it junk that makes me wonder if she really understood how calculated her cruelty was. The way she planned those family outings without telling the narrator feels less like forgetfulness and more. Someone had found my LinkedIn profile and linked it in the comments, and now strangers were messaging my professional contacts calling me a heartless monster who evicted a poor widow. The next morning, my supervisor called me into his office at the IT firm where I'd worked for 6 years. He closed the door behind me and pulled up the viral video on his computer screen, showing me scrolling through comment after comment calling for people to boycott my company. He told me the company supported me personally, but the board was worried about reputation damage and suggested I work from home for a while until things calmed down. I packed up my desk that afternoon, carrying my plants and photos to my car while coworkers avoided eye contact. When I got home, I found Robert in my front yard on his knees, pulling weeds from the flower beds. He'd brought bags of soil and trays of purple petunias, the same flowers my mom used to plant every spring before Linda paved over her garden to put in a concrete patio. I watched from the kitchen window as he worked in silence, dirt covering his hands and knees, sweat dripping down his face even though it was barely 60 degrees. Neither of us mentioned that this was the first time he'd done yard work here since Mom died. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of breaking glass at 3 a.m. Someone had thrown a brick through my living room window with a note rubber banded around it that said, "Give back what you stole," in black marker. I called 911 while checking my security camera footage on my phone, seeing only a figure in a dark hoodie running away, their face completely hidden. Deputy Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later and took photos of the damage while telling me this was the 4th report filed about me this week. 3 of Linda's friends had claimed I was harassing them, though they had no proof and hadn't actually seen me near them. He said the reports were probably fake, but they created a paper trail that could become a problem if things escalated. The next afternoon, Jessica texted asking to meet at the same coffee shop. She slid her phone across the table, showing me screenshots of a group chat where Michael was bragging about getting into my old social media accounts from high school. They were planning to post old photos and messages to make me look like an unstable teenager who'd always been troubled. Jessica had taken pictures of everything before Michael could delete the messages. I spent that evening calling my old high school friends only to find that Linda had already reached half of them. She'd been telling them I had mental health issues, that I'd threatened her, that I was violent and dangerous. 2 friends who'd let me sleep on their couches after the eviction wouldn't even return my calls anymore. Kayla, who'd been my lab partner junior year, texted me saying she didn't know what to believe but thought it was best if we didn't talk for a while. A week later, I arrived at work to find security guards standing by my desk with a cardboard box. Someone had sent an anonymous tip to HR claiming I'd threatened to hurt my coworkers and bring a weapon to the office. Even though it was obviously fake, company policy required immediate suspension pending a full investigation. I had to hand over my badge and laptop while my coworkers watched from their cubicles. The security guard walked me to my car carrying the box of my belongings. That afternoon, Attorney Hartley filed a cease and desist order against Linda for defamation. The process server went to her apartment 3 times over the next week, but she refused to answer the door even though her car was in the driveway. He could hear her TV through the door, but legally couldn't force entry just to serve papers. After the 3rd attempt, attorney said we'd have to try alternative service through the newspaper. Claire called that night and said she was organizing a small gathering with people who actually knew me in high school. She'd reached out to everyone who'd let me crash at their houses, who'd seen me work 3 jobs while finishing school, who knew the real story. They met at Claire's apartment the next Saturday, sharing photos from that time, including one of me asleep on Claire's couch, still wearing my Walmart uniform after a double shift. Everyone remembered how I never complained, never asked for more than a couch to sleep on, always tried to pay them back somehow, even when I had nothing. Then Robert showed up at my door holding a worn leather journal. He'd been cleaning out a storage unit he'd forgotten about and found a box of my mom's things, including her diary from the year before she died. The pages were full of dated entries about Linda's behavior before they even got married. Mom had written about Linda lying to Robert about me, telling him I'd said things I never said, creating problems that didn't exist. One entry from 3 months before the wedding described Linda suggesting they send me to boarding school so they could start fresh as a real family. Mom had written, "I told Robert if he sends Kimberly away, I'm leaving him," in shaky handwriting. The last entry was 2 weeks before her car accident and simply said, "Linda told me today that Kimberly would be better off without me. I'm scared of what she might do." Hartley flipped to another page and pointed at an entry from my 8th birthday where Mom wrote that Linda had thrown away all my birthday presents while I was at school, claiming they were taking up too much space. I remembered coming home that day and finding my new art supplies gone, Linda saying she thought they were old junk. Page after page showed the same pattern, with Linda testing boundaries, pushing harder each time, always with Dad too busy or too tired to notice what was happening right in front of him. Jessica called me that night and asked if we could meet at a coffee shop downtown because she had something important to tell me about her mom. When I got there, she was already waiting in a back corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She looked up at me with red eyes and said Linda had done the exact same thing to her real dad, not Michael's dad, but her biological father, who Linda divorced when Jessica was 4. She explained how Linda had turned everyone against him during the divorce, telling his family he was unstable, calling his work to report fake concerns about his mental state, filing false police reports that got thrown out but still showed up in custody hearings. Jessica was too young to understand back then, but she'd found the court documents a few years ago, and the pattern was identical to what Linda was doing to me now. 2 weeks passed with things feeling almost normal until I got called into HR at work, and they told me the investigation was complete, and while they found no evidence of wrongdoing, the damage to client relationships meant they had to make changes. They offered me my position back, but with conditions including working from home only, no client contact, and any further incidents would mean immediate termination without severance. Walking out of that meeting, I realized I was back to walking on eggshells, afraid to make any wrong move, just like when I lived in Linda's house as a teenager. Michael must have been tracking Jessica's phone or following her because he showed up at Linda's apartment while Jessica was there packing some of her things to stay with a friend. He started screaming at her about betrayal and family loyalty, and Linda came out of her bedroom already worked up into one of her rages. Jessica tried to leave, but Linda blocked the door, and when Jessica pushed past her, Linda slapped her hard across the face while screaming that she was a traitor and no daughter of hers. Jessica had already pulled out her phone to call for help and caught the whole thing on video, including Linda grabbing her arm and leaving nail marks when Jessica tried to get away. The next morning, Jessica went straight to the police station with the video and filed assault charges, the officer taking photos of the bruise on her face and the scratches on her arm. The prosecutor's office opened a case file, and suddenly Linda's victim story had an official police report contradicting it with video evidence of her attacking her own daughter. 3 days later, I was making dinner when someone knocked on my door, and I opened it to find 2 people in business clothes with CPS badges saying they'd received a report about a dangerous homeless man living in my home around neighborhood children. They explained that the caller, who they couldn't name but I knew was Linda, claimed I was harboring someone who posed a risk to the community, and they were required to investigate. Robert was in the living room when they came in and immediately started shaking, but the lead investigator was patient, sitting down and asking him gentle questions about why he was here and what our relationship was. Robert broke down crying as he explained how Linda had manipulated him for years, convinced him he was a terrible father, made him believe Kimberly would be better off without him until he abandoned his own daughter. The investigator took notes and looked around the house, checking the guest room where Robert was staying, noting everything was clean and safe, and that Robert was clearly just a broken father trying to make amends with his daughter. After they left, I found myself constantly checking my rearview mirror on the way to work, jumping when my phone rang, screening every call, looking over my shoulder in parking lots. I installed security cameras, changed my locks twice, started parking in different spots at the grocery store, and realized I was living in fear in the very house where I was supposed to finally feel safe. Robert found me one night sitting on the porch and brought out a shoebox he'd been hiding in his car, full of photos I'd never seen, including my mom pregnant with me, my first birthday with cake all over my face, Christmas mornings before Linda existed in our lives. Robert's timing with that shoebox is like bringing tissues to someone who's been cutting onions for 3 hours straight. Necessary, but wow, does it make the waterworks worse right now. He showed me pictures of Mom teaching me to ride a bike, of the 3 of us at the zoo, of bedtime stories and Halloween costumes, then looked at me with tears in his eyes and said if I needed him to testify about Linda's abuse in court or anywhere else, he would do it. 4 weeks after the eviction, Linda appeared on the local morning news as a special interest story about predatory housing practices, sitting there in her best victim outfit, telling the reporter I had used insider knowledge from my IT job to steal her family home. The reporter, who clearly hadn't fact-checked anything, nodded sympathetically as Linda spun her tale of being blindsided by a vengeful stepdaughter who held a grudge for normal parental discipline, and I watched my phone start blowing up with messages from co-workers and old classmates who'd seen the broadcast. My lawyer Hartley called within an hour and said he was sending a legal notice to the news station demanding they take down the video and issue a retraction. The station's legal team spent the rest of the day reviewing the foreclosure documents I'd provided through Hartley. By evening, they pulled the online video, but screenshots and clips were already spreading across Facebook and Twitter. The next morning, I walked into my office building and noticed 2 security guards talking near the entrance. One of them stopped me and said everyone had to evacuate because someone had called in a bomb threat. The threat specifically mentioned me by name and said I deserved to die for what I'd done to my poor stepmother. Police cars and fire trucks filled the parking lot while the bomb squad searched the building. An FBI agent took me aside and asked about any enemies I might have. Even though they found nothing and deemed it non-credible, my boss called me that afternoon. She said I needed to take a mandatory leave for everyone's safety while they investigated the threat. I spent the rest of the day day at home when Jessica called my phone. She said she'd been thinking about everything and wanted to help. She came over with her laptop and showed me years of text messages from Linda. Message after message talked about how she would destroy anyone who crossed her. One from 3 years ago described exactly how she'd use the media to ruin someone's reputation. Another outlined how to make someone look crazy by filing false reports. Jessica had saved everything because she'd always been scared of her mom. Claire showed up that night with a duffel bag and said she wasn't letting me stay alone. We spent hours installing new security cameras on every door and window. She helped me change all the locks even though Linda didn't have keys anymore. While we worked, Claire admitted she was scared something bad would happen to me, but she also said she was proud I was standing my ground after everything Linda had done. That night I couldn't sleep and walked through the house in the dark. I remembered hiding behind the couch when Linda would scream at my dad. I remembered crouching in the closet under the stairs when she'd storm through looking for things to throw away. I stood in what used to be my room, now painted a different color, and remembered crying myself to sleep. This house that should have felt like victory just felt like a prison I'd locked myself into. 2 days later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a typed note supposedly from Linda saying she couldn't take it anymore. The note blamed me for driving her to want to kill herself. It said I'd destroyed her life out of petty revenge and she had nothing left to live for. The typing had obvious mistakes and the language didn't sound like Linda at all. I immediately called Hartley and he told me to photograph everything without touching it more. I forwarded the photos to him and drove to the police station to file a report. The officer taking my statement said they'd add it to the growing file of harassment. 6 weeks had passed since the eviction when the prosecutor's office finally called. They'd reviewed all the evidence including the assault video from the courthouse, the threatening messages Jessica had provided, and the false police reports. The prosecutor decided to charge Linda with harassment, filing false reports, and assault. An arrest warrant was issued that afternoon, but when police went to serve the warrant at the motel where she'd been staying, Linda was gone. Michael posted on Facebook that his mother was in hiding because she feared for her life. He claimed I had connections and would have her killed if she got arrested. He started a GoFundMe called Help a Terrorized Mother, with Linda's news interview as the main video. Within 2 days, he'd raised $3,000 from strangers who believed his story. The FBI agent called me a week later with interesting news. They'd traced the bomb threat call to a burner phone purchased at a gas station. The phone was bought with a credit card in Michael's name. They brought him in for questioning, but he claimed his wallet had been stolen weeks ago. Without security footage or more evidence, they couldn't hold him. He walked out of the FBI office and posted about being harassed by corrupt agents. Meanwhile, Robert had been quietly rebuilding his life. He found a job at a hardware store and moved into a small apartment across town. One evening, he showed up at my door holding something in his hand. It was a key to his new place. He said he wanted me to have it in case of emergencies. I'd never had access to anywhere he lived since Linda had kicked me out. The next week, Jessica called me at 2 in the morning, and her voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand her. She'd been going through her grandmother's medical records after the old woman kept getting sick every time Linda visited. The hospital charts showed weird symptoms that started 3 years ago, right when Linda moved closer to help with her care. Jessica found receipts in Linda's car for antifreeze purchases every few weeks, even though her car never needed any. She drove straight to the hospital where her grandmother was recovering from another mysterious illness and demanded they run toxicology tests. The nurse called security, but Jessica wouldn't leave until they agreed to test for ethylene glycol poisoning. Within an hour, the preliminary results came back positive, and Adult Protective Services arrived with 2 police officers. They moved Linda's mother to a secure medical unit and started documenting everything while Jessica sat in the hallway crying and throwing up from the shock. The detective who interviewed Jessica said this wasn't the first time he'd seen family members poison relatives for money. Over the next few days, APS investigators found Linda had been withdrawing $500 a week from her mother's accounts. They discovered she'd increased the old woman's life insurance policy 6 months before the poisoning started. The medical team said if Jessica hadn't caught it, her grandmother would have died within weeks from kidney failure. Meanwhile, my old co-workers started reaching out through LinkedIn and Facebook with messages I wasn't expecting. 3 of them said they never believed the accusations Linda had spread about me stealing company data. One guy from IT security called and told me someone had tried to hack into the HR system to plant fake complaints about me. The attempt came from a public library computer, but they'd saved all the logs and timestamps. I sat in my car outside the grocery store for 20 minutes that afternoon, just staring at the entrance. Linda's friends shopped there, and I knew they'd all heard her version of everything that happened. My hands were shaking and I couldn't make myself get out even though I needed food. I finally drove to a store 30 minutes away where nobody knew me. 2 months after the eviction, Jessica showed up at my door with 2 suitcases and her face covered in bruises. Michael had gotten drunk and shoved her down the stairs when she refused to lie to the police about me. She moved into my spare room, and we spent nights comparing stories about Linda's manipulation that we'd never been able to share before. Jessica showed me texts where Linda had told her for years that I was dangerous and mentally unstable. I showed her the journal entries I'd kept documenting every cruel thing Linda had done when I was a teenager. We both cried when we realized how Linda had turned us against each other to keep us from comparing notes. The library finally pulled their security footage from the day of the hacking attempt after the police got a warrant. The video showed Michael at the exact computer at the exact time someone tried to access my company's servers. Combined with the bomb threat evidence from the eviction day, they arrested him for cyber harassment and making terroristic threats. Linda came out of wherever she'd been hiding to bail him out and screamed at the officers that they were corrupt. At Michael's bail hearing, the judge looked at all the evidence including the bomb threat recording and the hacking logs. He set bail at $50,000 and ordered Michael to surrender all his electronics and wear a GPS monitor. Linda stood up in court and yelled that the whole system was rigged against her family. The judge warned her about contempt, and she sat down but kept muttering about conspiracies and setups. Right after Michael's hearing ended, the toxicology results came back confirming Linda's mother had antifreeze in her system. The police arrested Linda in the courthouse parking lot while she was still ranting about Michael's unfair treatment. This time, the judge denied bail completely because she was a danger to others and had already proven she'd run and hide. I had to testify before a grand jury about everything Linda had done over the years. I brought boxes of documentation, including journal entries from when I was 17 and witness statements from neighbors. Linda's mother getting poisoned with antifreeze makes me wonder how long Jessica suspected something was wrong before she finally checked those receipts. Michael using his own credit card for a burner phone seems oddly careless for someone planning harassment. What was he thinking there? The prosecutor asked me to describe specific incidents, and I told them about the thrown-out belongings and the sabotaged opportunities. The grand jury indicted Linda on attempted murder and elder abuse, along with fraud and theft charges. Robert asked to testify even though nobody required it, and his testimony hit everyone in that room hard. He sat in the witness chair and described how Linda had systematically destroyed his relationship with me while he watched. He admitted he'd chosen comfort over protecting his own daughter because standing up to Linda meant conflict. His voice broke when he said he'd failed as a father and would spend the rest of his life trying to make it right. The news crew showed up at my door 2 days after the trial wrapped up. The same reporter who'd run Linda's sob story now looking pretty embarrassed. They wanted to do a follow-up piece about predatory family members and financial abuse, and the reporter actually apologized on camera for not checking Linda's story better before airing it. I kept my answers short and focused on the facts, talking about how some family members use emotional manipulation to steal from their own relatives. The segment aired that night with the title, When Family Becomes the Enemy, and included interviews with financial abuse experts who backed up everything I'd said. Going back to work the next Monday felt weird, like walking into a room where everyone had been talking about you. Some coworkers gave me these pitying looks like I was some kind of victim, while others seemed suspicious, probably wondering what kind of person evicts their own stepmother. The break room conversation stopped when I walked in, and people suddenly remembered urgent emails they had to send. By lunch, I was eating alone in my car, watching YouTube videos on my phone just to avoid the awkwardness inside. 3 months after the eviction, things went completely sideways when Michael decided to violate his bail conditions. He created fake social media accounts and started posting wild accusations about me, saying I'd stolen the house through fraud and that I was some kind of criminal mastermind. The posts got more unhinged as the night went on, including threats about what he was going to do to me. Someone reported them to the police, and when officers showed up at his apartment to arrest him for the violations, he barricaded himself inside and started live streaming on Instagram. He was ranting about how I'd set him up, waving what looked like a knife around, and claiming the whole legal system was corrupt. The cops called in their crisis team and surrounded the building while Michael kept streaming his breakdown to whoever was watching. After 3 hours of negotiations through his door, they finally talked him into coming out peacefully. The whole live stream actually helped my case, because it showed how unstable he was and proved he'd been violating the restraining order. The judge denied bail this time, saying Michael was clearly a danger to me and possibly himself. While Michael sat in jail, Linda's mother reached out through my attorney with something huge. She was recovering in a care facility and wanted to provide a video deposition about Linda's history. The old woman looked frail on the video call, but her mind was sharp as she detailed how Linda had been stealing from her for years through forged checks and credit cards. She had bank records showing over $200,000 missing over 5 years, all traced back to Linda's spending. She also described how Linda had emotionally abused her, threatened to put her in the worst nursing home she could find if she ever told anyone, and had even tried to change her will. Jessica called me after hearing about her grandmother's testimony and asked if we could clean out Linda's abandoned apartment together. The landlord had given permission since Linda had disappeared without paying her last 2 months of rent. We spent a whole afternoon going through the mess Linda had left behind, finding boxes of letters from people she'd scammed over the years, detailed revenge plans she'd written against anyone who'd crossed her, and even printed emails where she bragged about her schemes to friends. Jessica looked sick as we read through page after page of her mother's calculated cruelty toward dozens of people. We found receipts for luxury items bought with her grandmother's money, while the old woman had been told they couldn't afford her medications. Then Linda's former friend Kayla contacted me with recordings she'd been secretly making for months. Kayla had started recording after Linda turned on her over some petty argument, and the audio files were damning. You could hear Linda planning the whole harassment campaign against me, laughing about the false CPS report she was going to file, and even discussing the bomb threat with Michael before he made the call. Kayla had kept recording even after their friendship ended because she was building her own legal case against Linda for defamation. She sent everything to my attorney and the prosecutor. My boss called me into his office the next week with HR present, sliding a document across the desk. They were offering me a severance package to leave quietly, making it clear that while they couldn't legally fire me for the situation, the controversy was affecting their business. Clients had been calling with concerns, and some were threatening to leave if I stayed. I realized in that moment that Linda had managed to destroy the career I'd spent 10 years building from nothing. Claire came over that night with her laptop and a bottle of wine, determined to help me find something new. We spent hours updating my resume and searching for remote positions where my past wouldn't follow me. She tried to keep things light, joking that I should add, survived systematic destruction attempt by psycho stepmother as a special skill. I laughed even though it hurt, grateful to have at least one person who still saw me as more than just the drama surrounding me. 4 months after the eviction, I walked through my house taking inventory of what my life had become. Every window had security bars now, cameras covered every angle of the property, motion sensors lit up the yard like a prison, and I'd installed 3 different locks on each door. The house I'd fought so hard to reclaim had turned into a bunker where I was basically hiding from the world Linda had poisoned against me. The pre-trial hearing was scheduled for the next week, and my lawyer called to tell me Linda had fired her public defender right there in the courtroom. I watched from the back row as she stood up and started yelling about how I'd bought off the entire justice system with my tech money, and how everyone from the judge to the bailiff was on my payroll. The judge kept banging his gavel, but Linda just got louder, pointing at me and screaming that I'd orchestrated orchestrated everything from the foreclosure to her arrest. She demanded to represent herself, and when the judge reluctantly agreed, she immediately filed 17 different motions accusing him of bias. The prosecutor stood there looking stunned, as Linda ranted about secret recordings and hidden cameras she claimed I'd planted in her apartment. After 20 minutes of this chaos, the judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation to determine if she was even competent to stand trial. Linda refused to leave with the court officers, claiming the psychiatrists were part of my network, and she'd never cooperate with my paid puppets. They had to physically remove her from the courtroom while she screamed about constitutional violations and conspiracies. The judge held her in contempt and ordered her held without bail until the evaluation could be completed. That same afternoon, Jessica called me sobbing because she'd just discovered Linda had opened credit cards in both her and Michael's names over the past 3 years. The bills had been going to a P.O. box Linda controlled, and Jessica only found out when a collection agency showed up at her work. The total debt was over $50,000 spread across 12 different cards, all maxed out on cash advances and expensive purchases. Jessica realized she'd been unknowingly funding Linda's vendetta against me this whole time through the money Linda stole using her identity. She had to file police reports, freeze her credit, and hire her own lawyer just to start untangling the mess. A week later, Robert texted asking if we could have dinner, and I agreed to meet him at a small restaurant downtown. We hadn't sat across from each other like this in over a decade, and at first neither of us knew what to say. Then he started talking about the day my mom died, how Linda had shown up at the hospital before her body was even cold. He told me Linda had immediately started boxing up mom's things that same week, claiming it was unhealthy to keep reminders around. She threw away mom's perfume bottles, donated her clothes without asking me, and painted over the mural mom had done in my bedroom. Robert admitted he was so lost in grief that he just let it happen, let Linda erase every trace of the woman who'd raised me. He said he understood now how she'd manipulated him from the start, using his vulnerability to take control of everything. The next morning, Michael's lawyer called my attorney with shocking news about recordings Michael had been secretly making for years. Apparently, Michael had been recording Linda since he was 18, as insurance, because even he was scared of what she might do. His lawyer had hundreds of hours of audio files stored on multiple devices that Michael had hidden over the years. The recordings included Linda admitting to lying to CPS about me, planning the harassment campaign, and laughing about how she'd destroyed that little brat's life. In one recording from just after the eviction, she bragged about making me homeless and said she hoped I'd ended up dead in a ditch somewhere. Robert's confession about letting Linda erase his wife's memory hits different than a simple apology. Watching your dad admit he traded your mom's perfume bottles for peace and quiet is next-level heartbreak material. Michael's lawyer played us a clip where Linda detailed her plan to burn down my house if the legal system didn't finish me off. Michael was offering all of this evidence in exchange for a plea deal on his own charges. His lawyer delivered 5 external hard drives to the prosecutor's office containing 5 years' worth of recordings, text messages, and emails. The prosecutor said it was the most comprehensive evidence package he'd ever seen in a harassment case. 2 days later, I got an unexpected call from a tech startup in Seattle offering me a senior position with a huge salary increase. The CEO had seen my work and wanted me to lead their new security division, but it would mean leaving Columbus immediately. I spent the next 3 days walking through my fortified house, trying to decide if I could really leave the place I'd fought so hard to reclaim. The job would give me a fresh start away from all of Linda's poison, but this house represented everything I'd overcome. I kept going back and forth, making pro and con lists, calling Claire for advice, unable to sleep. 5 months after the eviction, Jessica came over with a box of old family photos she'd found in Linda's storage unit. We sat on my living room floor going through pictures from before my mom died, and Jessica kept finding ones where I'd been obviously cropped out or my face had been marked over with black marker. There were family Christmas cards where Linda had cut me out and taped the edges back together, vacation photos where she'd scratched out my face so violently she'd torn through the paper. Jessica started crying and apologizing, saying she should have seen what was happening, should have protected me somehow. I told her she was just a kid too, and it wasn't her fault, but she kept saying she felt guilty for all those years of family dinners and holidays I'd missed. 3 weeks later, the psychiatric evaluation was complete, and Linda was found competent to stand trial despite her conspiracy theories. She immediately filed 23 motions claiming judicial bias, demanding the judge recuse himself, insisting on a jury from another county, and requesting a change of venue to federal court. The judge denied every single motion in less than 10 minutes, while Linda shouted objections from the defense table. She filed complaints with the Judicial Review Board, the State Bar Association, and even tried to citizens arrest the prosecutor in the hallway. Her court-appointed lawyer looked ready to quit as Linda accused him of being a plant sent to sabotage her defense. The prosecutor pulled me aside after the hearing and said they were offering Linda a plea deal of 15 years for attempted murder, harassment, fraud, and identity theft. She refused immediately, insisting she'd be vindicated at trial and that the truth would destroy me. Her own lawyer seemed relieved when she rejected the deal because it meant he wouldn't have to keep dealing with her much longer. 3 weeks later, 2 FBI agents knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. They showed me their badges and asked if I had time to talk about Linda's case. I let them in and made coffee while they set up a laptop on my kitchen table. The lead agent opened a folder full of screenshots and pushed it toward me. My hands started shaking when I saw what Linda had been doing online. She'd been on dark web forums asking about hiring someone to hurt me. The screenshots showed her uploading my photo and asking how much it would cost to make someone disappear. She'd asked about untraceable poisons and accidents that wouldn't look suspicious. The agent said she never actually sent money to anyone, but the research alone was enough for more charges. I stared at my own face in those screenshots, attached to posts about different ways to kill someone. The second agent told me they'd found these during their investigation into her fraud case. Linda had used the same computer for everything, never thinking to clear her history or use private browsing. They asked if I wanted protection, but I said no. I wasn't going to run from her anymore. That same week, I got a job offer from a tech company in Seattle that would have paid double my current salary. Claire came over with wine to celebrate, but I told her I was turning it down. She thought I was crazy until I explained that I needed to see this through. I couldn't leave town with Linda's trial coming up. Instead, I filed the paperwork to start my own IT consulting business from home. Claire became my first client, hiring me to set up the network for her new bakery. The next month, I had 3 more clients through word of mouth. Working from home meant I could control my schedule and still make every court date. I also hired a contractor to install one last security upgrade in my basement. When he came to give me an estimate, he looked at the plans for the panic room and didn't ask any questions. He just mentioned I was the 3rd person that month asking for one. The steel reinforced door could withstand a battering ram, and the room had its own ventilation system, emergency supplies, and a separate phone line. It cost me $15,000, but I slept better knowing it was there. 6 months after I'd evicted Linda, her trial finally started. I sat in the gallery surrounded by other witnesses and reporters who'd been following the case. The prosecutor had 23 witnesses lined up to testify about Linda's patterns over the years. The first witness was an elderly woman Linda had scammed out of her retirement savings. Then came former co-workers who described Linda's harassment campaigns against anyone who crossed her. A psychiatrist testified about Linda's narcissistic personality disorder and lack of empathy. Linda kept interrupting from the defendant's table, yelling that everyone was lying. The judge warned her 3 times before holding her in contempt and adding another charge to her list. Her lawyer looked exhausted trying to control her outbursts. On the second day, I took the stand for 6 straight hours. I brought 3 boxes of documentation with me, every receipt, email, and photo from my childhood. I showed them the pictures of my belongings in trash bags on the porch. I read the emails where Linda called me worthless and said I'd never amount to anything. When I described finding my mom's hoodie in the garbage, several jurors wiped their eyes. Linda started screaming that I was possessed by my dead mother's spirit seeking revenge. The judge had her removed from the courtroom while I finished testifying. The jury looked horrified as I calmly continued reading from my notes about years of abuse. Michael took the stand the next day and completely destroyed his mother's defense. He played recordings from his phone where Linda detailed her plans to destroy me completely. In one recording, she laughed about making me homeless at 17 and said it was the happiest day of her life. She talked about wanting to see me fail and end up on the streets. Several jurors looked disgusted as they listened to her voice cackling about a teenager's suffering. Michael also testified about the abuse he and Jessica had witnessed over the years. He said Linda made them promise never to help me or she'd cut them off financially. Against her lawyer's advice, Linda demanded to take the stand on day 4. She claimed she was the victim of a vast conspiracy between me, the FBI, and the prosecutor. She admitted to disciplining me, but insisted it was justified because I was a difficult child. She said throwing away my mother's things was helping me move on from the past. She showed absolutely no remorse for anything she'd done. When asked about the dark web searches, she said she was just curious and never meant to actually hurt me. The prosecutor asked her if she felt bad about making a 17-year-old homeless, and she said I needed to learn responsibility. Robert testified on the final day, bringing Linda's personal journal that he'd found after their divorce. He read entries where she detailed her manipulation tactics and admitted to enjoying the power she had over me. He publicly apologized to me for failing as a father, for choosing Linda over his own daughter. I mouthed the words "I forgive you" from my seat in the gallery, and he broke down crying on the stand. During closing arguments, Linda fired her 3rd lawyer and insisted on representing herself. She delivered a 40-minute rambling statement calling me evil incarnate and claiming she'd been trying to save everyone from my wickedness. She admitted she'd done everything the prosecution claimed, but said it was all justified to protect society from me. She compared herself to a holy warrior fighting against darkness. The jury left to deliberate at 2 in the afternoon and came back at 5 with their verdict. Linda was found guilty on all charges, including attempted murder, aggravated harassment, fraud, elder abuse, and making terroristic threats. When the foreman read the verdict, Linda jumped up and screamed that the jury had been bought and paid for. She accused me of bribing them and demanded a mistrial. The bailiffs had to physically restrain her as she tried to lunge toward the jury box. 7 months passed before the sentencing hearing finally arrived. The courtroom was packed again as victim after victim stood up to give their impact statements. Linda's own mother went first, her hands shaking as she described how Linda had stolen her retirement savings. She talked about the fake cancer treatments and the nights she went without her heart medication. Jessica stood next and talked about growing up terrified of her own mother. She described the bruises Linda left on her arms and the time she had to protect Michael from Linda's rages. Michael's statement was read by the prosecutor since he was too nervous to speak. He admitted helping Linda with some of her schemes, but said he did it because he was scared of what she'd do if he refused. When it was my turn, I kept it short and just described the garbage bags and being homeless at 17. Linda's courtroom behavior makes me wonder if she's actually lost touch with reality or if this is just another manipulation tactic. The way she fired 3 lawyers and called herself a holy warrior fighting darkness seems too dramatic to be genuine mental illness. Linda sat there stone-faced through all of it until the judge started speaking. The judge called her actions evil and said she showed no remorse for destroying multiple lives. He sentenced her to 25 years to life with possibility of parole after 20 years. Linda jumped up and screamed my name over and over as she collapsed to the floor. The bailiffs had to carry her out while she kept screaming that I'd ruined everything. Walking out of the courthouse felt strange because I didn't feel the victory I expected. Jessica grabbed my hand and squeezed it as we pushed through the reporters outside. I had nothing to say to them, so we just kept walking to the parking garage. Michael was waiting by my car with his lawyer, and he looked like he'd been crying. The judge had given him 18 months probation and mandatory therapy as part of his plea deal. He apologized for everything and said he knew I'd never forgive him, but he wanted me to know he was trapped too. I told him I heard him, and that was all I could give him right then. That night, I went back to the house alone for the first time since everything started. The place felt huge and empty, even though all my stuff was there. I walked through each room remembering both the good times with my mom and all the awful things Linda did. The master bedroom still smelled like her perfume, and I had to open all the windows. I sat on the floor of what used to be my childhood room, and the silence was so loud it hurt. Robert showed up the next weekend with paint supplies and said we were going to make the place mine. We spent 3 days painting every wall, and he helped me pick colors my mom would have loved. We painted the kitchen yellow like sunshine, and the living room a soft blue like the lake we used to visit. For the first time since I bought it back, the house actually felt like home. My consulting business started taking off through word of mouth from former colleagues. People who knew about the trial were impressed by how I'd handled everything and wanted to work with someone that strong. Within 6 months, I had more clients than I could handle and had to start turning people away. I realized I'd built something Linda could never touch or take from me. Jessica called one afternoon crying, but they were happy tears for once. She was pregnant and wanted to know if I'd be the baby's godmother. She said she wanted her child to know what real strength looked like, and I was the strongest person she knew. I cried for the first time since the trial ended. A year after the eviction, I hosted Thanksgiving at the house for the first time. Robert came early to help cook, and Jessica brought her husband and her baby bump. Claire flew in from Seattle where she'd moved for work and brought her new girlfriend. Some other friends from college came too, and the table was completely full. Someone mentioned during dinner that the house had never felt so warm and alive. 2 weeks later, a letter came from the state prison with Linda's prisoner number on it. I called Claire and Jessica over, and we sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope. We decided to read it together in case it was another one of her manipulation attempts. Linda's handwriting was shaky, but she still managed to blame me for everything that happened. She said I'd poisoned everyone against her and destroyed her life out of jealousy. At the very end, she wrote that maybe she had been a little harsh when I was younger. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. I folded the letter and walked to the backyard where Robert had built a fire pit years ago when Mom was still alive. Jessica showed up with marshmallows and graham crackers while I grabbed some old wood from the garage. She held up her phone and started recording as I dropped the letter into the flames. The paper curled and blackened while we watched Linda's words turn to ash. Jessica stuck a marshmallow on a stick and held it over the fire. We made s'mores right there over Linda's burning letter, and it felt like the best dessert I'd ever had. The next week, I called the security company and had them remove all the cameras except the doorbell one. The guy asked if I was sure since I'd paid for such an expensive system. I told him I didn't need a fortress anymore. The panic room in the basement became my wine storage after I had shelves installed. Robert needed knee surgery a month later and asked if he could stay in the guest room during recovery. It was weird having him live in the house again after all these years. One night, he sat in the kitchen looking around and told me this was how he and Mom had always pictured it would be. I started seeing a therapist twice a week to work through everything. She kept saying how strong I was, but I finally admitted I was tired of just surviving. I wanted to actually live for once. 3 months later, Jessica called from the hospital saying the baby was coming. I drove there so fast I probably broke every speed limit. When the nurse let me in, Jessica was holding this tiny, perfect baby girl. She put her in my arms and said they'd named her Kayla after my mom. I promised that little girl right there that nobody like Linda would ever hurt her. A week after Kayla was born, I got an email from the nursing home where Linda's mom had been staying. She'd passed away peacefully in her sleep. The director said she'd been much happier these last months without Linda visiting. There was a letter for me that she'd written before she died. All it said was, "Thank you for saving me from my daughter." Spring came, and I decided to plant a garden where Mom's used to be. Robert brought tomato plants, and Jessica brought flowers while carrying baby Kayla in a sling. We spent all day digging in the dirt and planting everything Mom used to love. Claire showed up with champagne, and we toasted to new growth right there in the yard. One morning, I was making eggs and bacon when I realized I was humming. I hadn't checked the locks once or looked over my shoulder. The house was just my house now. No ghosts or bad memories hiding in the corners. My IT consulting business landed a huge contract with a local hospital system. I needed to hire help, so I put out job postings. One applicant caught my eye immediately. She was 19 and had been homeless at 17 just like me. During the interview, she was so nervous her hands shook. I hired her on the spot and told her about the garbage bags. She cried right there in my office. Now on sunny days, I sit on the porch where Robert stood crying that day. Jessica brings Kayla over and they play in the yard where Mom's garden used to grow. Kayla laughs and chases butterflies while Jessica tells her stories about Grandma. The house that saw so much pain and anger is full of baby giggles and family dinners now. I don't think about Linda anymore. There's too much life happening right here to waste time on people who tried to break me. I won. Time to close the book on this one, folks. Appreciate you letting me sprinkle my 2 cents along the way. It's been quite the ride together. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.